She's A10. I am never singing again. Anyways, hey guys, I'm back, and before we start the video, I just want to say right off the bat that please don't send me or the Ink Tank any hate because of our videos. We're both just different people with different opinions, and at the end of the day, none of this really matters anyway, since the original continuity has been dead and buried for nearly 10 years now. So whatever is or was canon doesn't matter. Now that that's out of the way, let me just explain why I decided to make this video. This is the first time I've ever responded to anyone on this channel. I usually try to make this channel about my takes and opinion and not about anyone else's, because I think everyone's free to have their own opinions. However, after watching the latest Ink Tank video about Kevin and his backstory, I felt compelled to respond, not necessarily because I think Kuro can have his own opinion, but more so because I think he misinterpreted/misunderstood a few things about why people say Kevin got Retcon in Alien Force. But first, before we continue throughout this video, let's briefly go over what the definition of a retcon is. A retcon is a piece of new information that imposes a different interpretation on previously described events, and is typically used to facilitate a dramatic plot shift or account for an inconsistency. To make that as simple to understand as possible, basically just think of a retcon as a new piece of information that's added to a story that changes the way the original story was meant to be viewed/interpreted. Keep this in mind throughout the video, as it will be important later on when we start talking about what Ben 10 Alien Force added/changed from Kevin's original backstory. Now that I've got all that stuff out of the way, we can finally begin the video. Just as a heads up, I'm gonna be responding to Kuro in a weird order. Basically, I'm gonna start off with why I feel his conclusion was wrong, and then go over his supporting evidence and how it's kind of flawed. Please keep in mind that again, this is all just my opinion, not actual fact. With that out of the way, let's break down Kuro's conclusion about what happened to Kevin throughout the series.
To recap our timeline, Classic Kevin had no origin, UAF Kevin gave him one, and Omniverse retconned it. That is truly what happened.
Not exactly, Kuro. You see, the backstory that Alien Force gives to Kevin drastically imposes a new version of Kevin onto the classic series one, which, if you'll recall, is the definition of a retcon, which means that no, the Rooters arc wasn't the first arc to retcon Kevin, like you claim it is throughout this video. Now, in order for this all to make sense, I'm going to play a scene from the classic series involving Kevin 11, and now I want you, the viewer, to watch this scene, and throughout it, I want you to ask yourself, what is this scene trying to tell us about Kevin 11?
You could hang with us!
What's in it for me?
For starters, people will like you.
Oh man, you are so dim! Your mommy dropped you on your head when you were a little baby? Now give me that watch!
Now, after having watched that scene, what do you think the show is trying to tell you about Kevin's character? I'll tell you what I see when I look at this scene. First up, I see Ben offering his hand to Kevin and offering him a chance in his family, basically offering Kevin the one thing he never had and trying to help him grow. Then I see Kevin reject this offer and mock Ben for it, seeing it as a form of weakness and calling Ben dim for even doing this. This shows to me that Kevin sees trusting people and believing in your family as a form of weakness. And then I hear Kevin's voice change a little. He sounds hungry. No, scratch that. He sounds desperate when he demands that Ben give him the watch. This tells me that Kevin values power above love, which makes a kind of sense since throughout this episode we see Kevin basically has been fending for himself for a very long time. So in a twisted way, it makes sense that the classic series Kevin values power above friendship. Now, I'm sure many of you have radically different interpretations from this scene, but even if your interpretation is super different from mine, I'm willing to bet that your interpretation was changed by the information we learned later on in Alien Force. See, in Alien Force, Kevin's new backstory states that he goes insane whenever he absorbs energy because his father was an Osmosian, a race of beings that can absorb energy and material. And after Kevin's father died, he ran away from home shortly after his mother remarried, but still desperately clung on to the idea of being a plumber just like his father was. So now that we know that information, let's reanalyze the scene. Now when Ben offers his hand to Kevin, instead of Kevin rejecting it out of pure spite or believing that love is for the weak, perhaps he's doing it because he already had a perfect family and it's already been taken from him, so he's not willing to risk getting in with another family. And when he hungrily demands for the watch, aka the Omnitrix, it doesn't come across as Kevin loving power now, it comes across as Kevin being desperate for more energy because of his race's addiction to energy. Do you see how Alien Force's new backstory changes the way I and many others interpret the original series version of Kevin? If your answer to that is yes, then you cannot say that Alien Force's backstory didn't retcon Kevin's original character, because as we previously discussed, a retcon is just a new piece of information that imposes a different interpretation on previously described events, which is exactly what Kevin's new origin in Alien Force does. It introduces a new piece of information, that information being Kevin goes crazy when he absorbs energy, which then imposes a new interpretation on previously described events, and is done so in order to facilitate a dramatic plot shift or account for an inconsistency. That plot shift / inconsistency being Kevin being so normal when he's grown up and joining up with the Tennysons, when in the classic series he did the exact opposite and was a complete psycho. It isn't just an add-on like Kuro refers to it as, it's a straight up retcon. And before I hear people in the comments saying, well A10, that's just your own personal opinion, I had a drastically different interpretation of Kevin that wasn't at all affected by the new information we learned in Alien Force. Listen here buddy, despite what your English teacher might have told you, there are such things as bad / misinterpretations of popular media. And if you for whatever reason believed Kevin was supposed to be a sympathetic or redeemable character in the classic series, you clearly weren't paying attention. The classic series goes out of its way to portray Kevin as being irredeemable, so when UA tries to come up with a reason as to why he's redeemable and adds on a new piece of information to facilitate that character shift, it is effectively retconning Kevin. Look at the definition on screen again if you don't believe me. With that out of the way, let's move on to the Duncan Rillo tweet.
Duncan disagrees that there was ever any origin for Classic to begin with. He also agrees that since UAF only expanded on Kevin without changing anything in the show, that the Osmosian alien lore is in fact an evolution of the character.
So for those of you that don't know who Duncan Rillo is, he is part of Man of Action, the original creators of Ben 10, and Kuro claims that his tweet was enough for him to rework this video entirely. And Kuro also claimed that this brand new information that Duncan Rillo revealed changes everything we as fans thought about the classic series Kevin. Was he right about that? Well, not exactly. But first, let's go over the Duncan tweet itself, since I think Kuro actually kind of misinterpreted it a little bit. Duncan Rillo's latest tweet stated that being a mutant was never specified within Kevin's backstory during the classic series, that he was considered to have absorption powers, and that he evolved over time after subsequent appearances. What I think Kuro didn't realize here was that Duncan Rillo wasn't talking about Alien Force, he was talking about the classic series. You see, in the classic series, Kevin changed or evolved into a mutant amalgam of various different alien species after absorbing the power within the Omnitrix with his absorption powers. I think Kuro mistook this tweet to be confirmation that Alien Force's depiction of Kevin isn't considered a change or retcon by Duncan Rillo, but rather that it's considered an evolution of the character, due to Duncan Rillo's slightly vague wording of evolved over time. So basically what I'm saying is Duncan doesn't really see Alien Force Kevin as a true evolution of the character, and that he considers the classic series Kevin to have had absorption powers, which means that by adding the whole Kevin is an Osmosian with the ability to absorb things explanation that Alien Force tacks on, it is adding on a new piece of information that imposes a different interpretation on previously described events. So yeah, the Osmosian thing is still a retcon. But let's say that I'm the one misinterpreting what Duncan meant in that tweet. Does Duncan Rillo calling Kevin being an Osmosian an evolution of the character not make that a retcon? The answer, dear viewer, is no, and ironically is brought up in Kuro's video itself. You see, death of the author is an idea that basically means the writer's own personal feelings / experiences shouldn't be viewed when talking about the actual canonicity of a story. Basically, even if Duncan himself likes the change, it wasn't set up properly within the classic series, so it would still be a change / retcon. So yeah, once again, Alien Force has definitively retconned Kevin by giving him a new backstory. At this point, that's undeniable. With that out of the way, let's talk about Kuro's problems with the Rooters arc and the agenda the writers had when writing it.
So it's not really about being more like Classic. The Omniverse crew wanted to do it just to satisfy themselves. Sure, UAF writers did the same a few times too, notably with Magic, but the UAF crew has always been open about the changes they've made, and it feels disingenuous when the Omniverse crew does it too, but blankets their intentions as being a savior of continuity. The UAF crew had no ill intentions to the Classic series that came before, and made changes to benefit their story, not just for the sake of changing the lore aimlessly.
So for some reason, Kuro seems convinced that the Omniverse writers made the Rooters arc out of spite for what the UAF writers did to Kevin's backstory, and not because they wanted to make Omniverse more like the Classic series by changing Kevin into a mutant. But here's the thing, that makes no logical sense. It's impossible for the Omniverse writers to have an agenda against the UAF writers. Because contrary to what Kuro would have you believe, Derek J. Wyatt didn't write this arc. The people that did write this arc, however, are the same people that have been writing Ben 10 since Ben 10 Alien Force. And those writers are Matt Wayne, Charlotte Fullerton, and Len Wein, all three of whom worked on Ben 10 Alien Force and Ben 10 Ultimate Alien. That's right, dear viewer, the OV writers are the UAF writers.
How could you betray us?
This is why I always say that you can't blame the Rooters arc for retconning Kevin's backstory without blaming UAF for doing it first, because you're just a hypocrite otherwise. Because not only was it the same exact thing, but it was also written by the same exact people. They were just doing what they always do, changing the story to better suit their own storyline, regardless of continuity or what happened beforehand. Now, before I recap and close out the video, I do want to point out one thing. I know Dwayne McDuffie sadly passed away before the Rooters arc was made, and he was one of the big writers involved in the Osmosian retcon that took place during Ultimate Alien. So we don't know what exactly he would have done had he been alive and made the Rooters arc himself. However, I still don't think the Rooters arc would change all that much, because Matt Wayne and Charlotte Fullerton were both very close with Dwayne McDuffie. Now, for those of you that don't know how close Matt Wayne and Charlotte Fullerton were to Dwayne McDuffie, the Ben 10 Wiki literally identifies Matt Wayne as Dwayne McDuffie's best friend, and Charlotte Fullerton is literally Dwayne McDuffie's wife. So I think it's fair to say that these two probably didn't have any agenda against Dwayne McDuffie, and they probably know a little bit about Dwayne and how he writes things, and how he would have approached the Rooters arc had he been alive. Even if you don't believe that second part, I still think this information is enough to dispel the whole idea that the Rooters arc was made on an agenda like Kuro the Artist claims it is. And before anyone tries to blame Derek J. Wyatt for the creation of the Rooters arc, please remember that he is an art director. He has no say over what gets made in Ben 10, and has never written a single episode of any Ben 10 series. Even if he did somehow convince the OV writers to make the change, it would still be on the OV writers to decide if that was something they wanted to do. And clearly it was if they straight up did it. And as I just went over, there's no way they had an agenda against themselves or against Dwayne McDuffie, so they probably did it because they thought it would be more faithful to the Classic series. The very reason Derek J. Wyatt offered when answering a fan question. So yeah, I think I've pretty much proved my point here. So let me just wrap everything up so we can conclude this video, alright?
So, how'd you get your power?
I was born with it.
So to sum up what actually happened with Kevin's character, basically the Classic series had a very clear direction with this character, even if they didn't really have a backstory planned for him. Alien Force created a backstory, however did so in order to facilitate Kevin's dramatic character shift, and in doing so added on new information to the Classic series version that causes that version of Kevin to now be seen in a very different light than what he was originally intended to be, thus retconning the Classic series. Then Omniverse came in a few years later and did pretty much the exact same thing. That is truly what happened. It doesn't matter if you personally feel like Alien Force's retcons weren't retcons. They factually were, and line up with the exact definition of what a retcon is, so they are retcons. It doesn't matter if you feel like the OV writers made the Rooters arc solely to trample over UA's lore, because all evidence points to the contrary. And before I get any of the hate comments that I just know are already on their way, it's fine if you have a different opinion from me, that's really not the issue. But claiming that Alien Force didn't retcon Kevin, and that the Rooters arc was somehow made out of spite towards UA, are just factually wrong statements, and I don't want to see these things become commonplace in the Ben 10 fandom, because they're lies. I don't know why Kuro believes them so strongly, but they're incorrect. Anyways, that about does it for this video. If you're interested in more Rooters arc content, I have a 2-part series where I talk about everything I love from the Rooters arc, so go check it out if you're interested. That's all for this video. See you guys in my next upload.